Here with another video, not in the car today, mixing it up, getting crazy. At home, spring break when I'm recording this, 2024, so not in the car. Chance to stay out of the car today a little bit. Anyway, what are we talking about today? So last video, I started talking about the principles of training and how important these are when we start thinking about programming. That we can keep our programs pretty simple. The first one was a progressive overload, which is probably the most important if you want to see any sort of progress in your training, no matter what you're doing. The next one I'm going to talk about, though, may seem a little bit intuitive, but oftentimes this is where we have to maybe understand the research literature a little bit and think carefully about what we're trying to accomplish, and that is specificity. Before I get into that, though, be sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subs so all my hopes and dreams can come true. Buy a Lambo, 1,000 subs. That's what they say anyway. I've watched some YouTube videos, and that's what they say. And then you get to rent a Verbo. I guess it's not called Verbo, VRBO or Airbnb. You get to rent that and then make a video like you're super rich. So that's going to be pretty exciting for me. So if you get to 1,000 subs, I'd appreciate it. For those who've already subscribed, thank you for doing so. Hope you're enjoying the videos. All right, let's get into it. Enough of my Lambo dreams. Specificity. So again, this is pretty intuitive. If you want to run fast, you got to run faster. If you want to lift heavy weights, you got to lift heavier, weights than you did, last week or even the last session that you identified as a strength training session. But with that said, it's easy to make the mistake of not following specificity. So this is where, again, I mentioned the research literature knowledge might be helpful. So you want to know the main catalyst for gaining muscle mass. It's not getting stronger per se. I'm not saying getting stronger isn't important, because it is still. Okay, tension is still important. But the time, especially when training those more type 1 muscle fibers, skeletal muscle fiber types, these are kind of like the Priuses of muscle fibers. They need to be really exhausted. And so doing a high amount of volume will build those muscle fiber types. On the other side, though, if you want to get stronger, you need to lift heavy stuff because it's more of a neurological and hypertrophy response. But now we're targeting more the larger fibers. The research literature's changed over the years, and size principle of motor unit recruitment used to say that you could use fatigue in order to get to the big muscle fibers. That may or may not be supported now, at least not in everyone. Okay, so what that means is if you want to, just what I said earlier, if you want to run fast or if you want to lift heavy things, you're going to have to do both of those things. And so specificity is really, really important. All right, so load. I say this with clients all the time. Load is king. Okay, when it comes to strength training, so you want to bleed volume and not load. If you're doing a training program and you're like, I'm not going to make these reps for this set. On the other side, if hypertrophy is the goal, gains and mass, then you'd want to bleed out the load and keep the reps. So that'd be more like dropping load to the last set or even the middle of the set. Where conversely with the strength training, you might shave off a rep. Like, I'm just not going to make it on this one. I'll go to failure. The fatigue's not worth it. I'm going to rack it. Or, if I have to pick before the set, I know I'm not going to make it. What am I going to shave? It'd be the rep. Okay, so in mid set or before the set. Now you could also do a cluster where you rack it and rest for 30 seconds and then hit that last rep. But the point is that the load has to be retained. Okay, when we look at now combining the two. All right, so let's think about this. The specificity of training and strength training requires heavy loads. Well, there's different, and I know there's this debatable, but they have video on sarcoplasmic hypertrophy and the hypertrophy that has to do more so with building the actual the contractile proteins, the myofibrils. And so the myofibrils, think of those as the strength-producing part of the muscle. I'm simplifying this, but the strength-producing part of the skeletal muscle, and the sarcoplasmic stuff is kind of the supportive structures of the muscle. And so, if you're interested in size, you don't really care where the size comes from. You just want to be bigger. So you can work the sarcoplasmic side, high volume stuff, a lot more and gain those type of benefits. That's why the type 1 fibers respond better. If you want to gain the hypertrophy mass that is more force producing per cross-sectional area, then you're going to have to lift heavier loads. What that's going to mean, though, is the volume is lower. And you've heard me say this in other videos. And because the volume is lower, though, it's going to take longer to see hypertrophy. Now, I know there's studies there's not many. It's 3 sets of 10 and 10 sets of 3, are equal, right, in terms of their volume, in terms of their hypertrophy gains, because the volume is the same. And that's, yes, like this doesn't go against that. What I'm saying though is doing 10 sets of 3, even from that the study by Schoenfeld that's often thrown out there, and just it's as good a study as you can hope for when these training studies. It's hard to repeat that. In fact, the participants in those studies said, man, they got pretty beat up doing that. So when you look at incurring higher intensities and trying to accrue enough volume to see hypertrophy that is a little bit more towards the myofibril growing side, it's going to take longer to see those gains. Okay, and so if mass is just the goal, then you can do high volume stuff, and you're not as worried about where that mass inside the muscle is coming from. That's specificity as well. That's the point. So if you're an athlete, let's say, okay, and you want to gain muscle mass, you have to kind of decide what kind. Now, it isn't a light switch type of thing, right? It's a continuum. So I'm not saying, if you only do sets of 5 and less, then you're going to get super strong muscles only and you get no sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm also not saying that if you do sets of 30, that you're not going to gain any strength gains. But the research literature we have, I think just practice, right? That after those initial gains that somebody might have early on doing higher rep sets, that strength gains they don't come around very well. They don't come around significantly at those higher rep loads because the load is too low. Okay, so that's why the 80 percentiles, the 5 rep range seems to be a good one for both hypertrophy and strength, especially in men. My experience, this is just my own spitballing here, that women gain from a little bit more higher intensities, and it has a little bit more to do with just practicing with the weight and not being exposed to that, maybe more sociological part of that, and then the lower rep ranges, because women are traditionally more type 1 physiologically. So in terms of gaining mass and strength, there might be some more benefit of working the tips. This is just me spitballing though, okay? So doing higher rep, like sets of 10-ish, and then doing into the higher percentages, sets of 3. Specificity still holds though. You're still gonna have to do the heavier percentages. Women can tolerate those higher percentages for more repetitions as well and recover from them where men can't. That's why the 80% to 85, again, that 5 rep range, 5-6 rep range, 4 rep range seems to be pretty a sweet spot for guys, where if you do heavy doubles and a lot of sets, that it can beat you up pretty quick. You may not recover as well, and then sets into the 8 and the 10 is just not enough intensity, and that volume will wear you out as well. So anyway, that's part of specificity as well. There's the kind of simplistic and true view of, again, you want to run faster, you need to figure out how to do that. If you want to lift heavy weights, you got to lift heavy weights. But then we can kind of subdivide that a little bit too when we talk about gains in mass, and then what are appropriate load rep ranges, loads for specific goals that somebody might have. Even power, right? Power is often like people think of like Olympic style weightlifting, and certainly that is a powerful thing. Whatever the movement may be, whether it's the jerks, power jerk, split jerk, snatch of all the different varieties, and clean and jerk combinations, or just the clean and the power clean, so on and so forth. Okay. The thing you have to consider though is that what kind of power do you want? So let's say it's an athletic situation. Is somebody just going to be moving their body weight, their own body weight? Then it may be better, as we look at the equation for power, force times velocity, to work more on the velocity side. So if you're doing cleans, let's say, and somebody's only going to move their own body in a sport, let's say like a sprinter, okay? It may be better for them to do loads that are more in the 70 to 75 percentile range, maybe even touching 80, but working on really speed of movement. Not just the pulling, but also getting under the bar very, very quickly. Where let's say you have an offensive lineman or somebody who needs to be powerful while they're under load, then working up to those higher percentages in the mid 80s, maybe even touching 90s, depending on technique, of course. I'm assuming technique might be important. And you can apply that to any power, quote unquote, power exercise. What kind of power is needed? Most that, even athletes, football obviously gets the most attention, American football, rugby, things like that. American football, certainly United States. But most of the other sports, you don't really move other bodies very often. The only one may be like wrestling. And really, if you can move your own weight classes on the barbell, maybe a little bit higher, a little bit lower, that might be a good way to work. And there's no need to work them to 100% or 95% or right of your max. You're just working on a specific load that matches the weight class. Okay? Having coached Olympic style weightlifting for a long time, not as long as others, but about 15 years, somewhere in there. It's a very technical activity, and so picking the right force or velocity is important. Again, you could apply that to the squat, accommodating resistance chains and bands. What do you want to work on, right? If you just go static load, that's going to be more peak force off the bottom, where if you work more of accommodating resistance like a chain or a band, it's going to be a little bit more velocity driven, right? Especially, I'm thinking like a squat at the bottom, right? Obviously, you can overload the top of a squat with the chain or the condiment resistance, but in terms of like, if I should be more specific, at the bottom of the squat, specificity, if it's static load that you're really ramping up, then you can expect more peak force down there, right? Whereas if the bar and chain, or if the bands and chains are on the bar as a percentage of that same load, that load is obviously going to be lighter at the bottom, so the velocity is going to be higher, but peak forces may be lower, right? And so hopefully that makes sense. It's kind of an overlooked thing, though. I see this in athletics. I see this in coaches. I coach with soccer players doing strength conditioning, and these girls are running a mile in their warm up. Soccer, yes, is an aerobic sport, but if I'm working on speed, that is not how you get faster. You're not going to get faster doing that, jogging around a track, okay? And so some of the stuff still exists, especially in high school sports. You can't jog yourself faster, as I like to say. Again, when you look at the effective dose, like what is it? Is it intensity? So like with sprinting, run fast. It's got to be intense. If you can't run fast or jump high after a certain amount of volume, then you're doing conditioning. You're no longer being specific, right? If you do 10 sets of 10 counter movement jumps, how many of those really were at your maximal jump or around within 10% of your peak jump height? Not many. Okay, that's a lot of jumping. I'm just using that as an extreme example. That would be an example of violating specificity. You're supposed to be doing something that is pushing athletic performance, in this case jumping, and you end up doing a conditioning workout. As a former collegiate athlete, unfortunately I did that quite a bit. So it's still around, and it's easy to do as a coach as well. All right, I'm at 12 minutes. Sorry about that. Hopefully you're still with me, but if not, I guess it wouldn't matter because you're not here. But if you are, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Hope this was beneficial. More principles to come, and a viewer request for French contrast. I'm going to put that up in the next couple of days as well.